All right, welcome back, everybody. So this week we are going to continue with Ty Crowder from at Total Finishing Solutions. Make sure you go and like and subscribe to his YouTube channel. He's got a lot of awesome content there. I will leave a link in the description below. And this week we're going to talk about the history of spray guns and specifically the Wagner Air Coat. So let's get to it.
In 1893, a guy named Joe Binks brought the first spray gun into the world at the World's Fair in Chicago and pretty much changed the industry. I'll go back to that slide. It was $32.50 for a pump and a gun, and I did the math on that. In today's value, that would be about $1,000. Found that interesting. Also, a lot of people don't realize, but the Hvlp, which is a big name we all recognize, he was actually a retired medical doctor, and the story I've always heard is he had to paint a whole bunch of fencing, and he created this little guy over here and actually ended up patenting it, where he took compressed air, looks like what we'd see as an airbrush or like a perfume-looking bottle, and he was out whitewashing the fence and ended up patenting that, and that's where the Hvlp name came from. Who basically Binks and the Hvlp are sort of the early pioneers of spray equipment. I always love the history with our industry, because I think about it like guys like you out there trying to educate and pioneer some things. These were the early pioneers that were excited about spray guns and finishing back then, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's something that I feel like is somewhat lost in the industry now. We really don't understand the history of these things and where they've come from and, the technologies that we have, today.
I agree. That's why I like to tell the story of the technology with history involved with it. So as we kind of move down the timeline, next kind of big players that enter are the Gray Company. They formed in 1926 in Minneapolis. You now know them as Graco. So they're, obviously another one of the biggest names in finishing. 1929, a small company in northern Paris, suburb of Paris, opened up. They actually had a contingency of Russian troops that helped them in World War I, and as a tribute to the help of their town during the war, they named the company Kremlin. So we all know those guys in the wood industry as well. After World War II, a guy by the name of Joseph Wagner enters the market and founds a company named after himself, Wagner. He had some huge successes in the 50s and 60s in Europe. They were always a very industrial company over there, whereas when they came to the North American market, they got into more of the homeowner, consumer, and contractor market. And we see them a little bit as the buzz guns and the Home Depot big box stuff. In Europe, it's very much not that way. They are probably the dominant player in industrial pumps and spray guns over there. And
I want to stop just for a second on that, because that's one of the things that I've run into is that when people see Wagner, they think of the Wagner power painter, and they don't really realize that these guys have some of the most innovative equipment in Europe, and that's pretty much predominantly that they use over there, like you said. And this has been Brian Rocio from MK Sales. I was asking him what kind of stuff they're using. He goes, dude, it's all Wagner.
Yeah. You saw in that video of the VD finishing system with the 70-year-old guy, running that line. There was like 5 or 6 Wagner pumps right there, and then the Wagner and Telemix. It was a beautiful system. The connotation when you don't know who Wagner is in North America is you think of them as the homeowner stuff. And that's a completely different division of Wagner, although somewhere at the top in the parent company chain, it's all owned by them. There's a finishing division, industrial, out of Europe that we're going to kind of focus on the rest of this. Something that I think is really cool about Wagner is because of their early success, this guy, Joseph Wagner, rather than, I don't think he had kids was the issue. Rather than willing the company on when he passed, he put the whole company into a trust, and it's a not-for-profit. And so the Wagner company as a whole takes all of their profits every year, and they donate them to educational foundations around the world. which as far as I know, is the only non-profit spray equipment company in the world, at least of any size.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So as we go through history, in the 1960s, the airless painter, style was really what became predominant and became the standard in new construction, and we saw that all the way through the 80s, where that was really, if you owned a cabinet shop and you were doing wood finishing, it was airless. That was really the accepted technology. When I was growing up, we sprayed everything with a 390 or a Titan 440 or that kind of thing, not knowing there was ever anything that was going to be better or more efficient than airless. And I think you're kind of on the cusp of that, where people get a hold of you. They're coming from that lineup and going, hey, there's got to be something better that gives me a higher efficiency, better particle breakup, nicer looking, less orange peel. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to figure out what all these technologies of spray guns are, how they work, and then how to line that up for what your application is for each kind of customer or project. So the first one that we can start with is the very first one that Joe Binks invented, the conventional spray gun. So this is a needle nozzle type of setup. So when people are talking about, I've got a 1.5 or a 1.8 nozzle, what they're talking about is this gap right here, and then how big this needle is that feels it. So that would be 1.0, meaning 1 millimeter, 1.5, meaning 1.5 millimeters in diameter. And obviously, the bigger that diameter, the more flow you get out of that gun. Fluid pressures on a conventional spray gun are quite low. They could be 0, meaning gravity, or up to maybe 60, 70 psi, which would be fed by either a pressure pot or a diaphragm pump, something of that sort. When you pull the trigger back with no atomizing air on, you get this stream that comes out of it. And when you add the atomizing air, it impinges on that stream and you get the breakup. These guns are huge air hogs. You're normally needing 40 to 70 psi to achieve atomization. You need a lot of CFM, 12 to 20 CFM. So you got to have a pretty big compressor, and that's something a lot of people don't think about when they're looking at a conventional spray gun. It also has the very fastest particle velocity, and you're going to see a relation between velocity and TE, which is transfer efficiency. The higher the velocity, the lower the transfer efficiency, and that's the 101 of spray guns of transfer efficiency. The faster you throw something, the harder it hits and bounces off, the lower your transfer efficiency becomes. Other thing, if you saw this graphic, because you're impinging that stream, more energy gets to the particles on the outside of that stream than the center of it. And so you always have a heavier centered fan pattern with any kind of a conventional or needle nozzle gun. So it's very typical. People churn the atomizing air up and they hold back, and they're trying to avoid getting that tiger stripe, right? Or that center stripe. And that also affects your transfer efficiency. However, a conventional gun, I'm going to give it an atomization rating. If I have a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give it a 9. It absolutely will obliterate the particles and make them the absolute smallest that you can get, other than maybe a rotary atomizing bell or something of that nature. The conventional gun does a really good job at particle breakup. So if I'm spraying, let's say, a motorcycle or a car, the metallic, and I want that like great look, there's no other gun that I'm going to go to than something like this, because I'm really not worried about the cost per gallon or the transfer efficiency. If I've got an ultra high, all that matters is finish quality and atomization. This is my guy. But if I'm doing this day in, day out, trying to finish cabinets and cost of materials on my mind, this is something to really be careful of, because it's going to cost you dearly to operate this gun continually. The other good thing about any kind of needle nozzle gun is it will spray thick materials, chunky materials, metallics, glazes, anything that would be hard to pass through an airless. So this is another reason why you might go to something like this. You can fly spec, you can do some specialty things with these kind of guns as well.
So real quick, what is somebody legitimately looking at? Because I run into this a lot, guys, because, this technology has been around for a while, so there's a lot of cheaper guns on the market, and somebody goes down here and gets one. You really probably need an 80-gallon tank or more.
Well, okay, so let's talk about air compressors.
Okay.
There's nothing to do with the tank size per se.
Okay.
Think of the tank like a balloon. If I've got all of a sudden a big rush of air that I can't keep up with, but I have this reservoir or balloon, it will give me a few seconds or moments in time of relief that my compressor can't keep up with. But in the long term, the size of the tank isn't going to dictate, capacity. The CFM output that the compressor is rated for would need to match what this spec is here, whatever your gun is, 12 to 20 CFM per minute.
Okay.
You buy a compressor, tank size isn't that important. That's more like a capacitor on a battery. It gives you a ability not to dip down real low, real fast, but the bigger the capacitor is, but it doesn't give you overall continual performance, right? It just takes the speed bumps out of it if you had a large rush of air go out all of a sudden.
Right. We've talked about that, and once we get to the air-assisted, airless side of it, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that was something, honestly, I've been confused about for a very long time. I think the information that's out there, that's why I asked that question. Do I need an 80-gallon tank? Do I need a 60-gallon tank? And so what I hear you saying is it's not the right question per se. The question is how many CFMs will the compressor put out, and you need to match that to whatever gun pairing that you have.
Exactly.
Great.
All right. So the next thing that kind of comes out is the HVLP spray gun. It essentially doesn't work any differently than a conventional gun. There was actually a vacuum cleaner company that came along in the 80s. They were looking at that really low transfer efficiency that we saw on conventional. They realized that if they put 10 PSI at the air cap, they could get a 65% transfer efficiency. They actually went to the South Coast, Southern California Air Quality District and sold that idea to them that they were going to revolutionize air quality by making all these paint guys increase their transfer efficiency to a minimum of 65%. And that was pretty much stamped into law in the mid 80s, and we still live with that today. So the guns are always stamped HVLP, and all that simply means is that if you are running 10 PSI at the air cap, you'll have a minimum transfer efficiency of 65%. However, I will tell you that 99% of all shops that I visit that run HVLP guns do not run them at 10 PSI at the cap. So that means that this number goes way down. The more I add air, the closer I get to a conventional spray gun, right? So it's something like the guy who bought it maybe felt good that he's going to have a higher transfer efficiency, but the guy actually spraying it cranks up the air and you lose that efficiency quite easily. There's just baffles in the body of the gun. That's what makes it different than a conventional gun. So, you might put in 20 or 25 PSI to the base of the gun to get 10 PSI out because you're trying to get the volume of air. But you're not getting a high efficiency if you're running that at a high pressure. I see a lot of shops running 50, 60 PSI to their HVLP gun, and it's certainly not running at 65% transfer efficiency.
That's pretty high pressures, man. That's there.
Yeah. The other thing with HVLP, because if you truly are running with 10 pounds at the cap, you get very large particle breakup as compared to a conventional gun, and you normally get a slower working speed, or as you've seen on some of your other videos that I've watched, you have to thin the product because the thicker the viscosity is, the harder it is to break up with air. So I'm going to give this an atomization rating of 3 if I'm truly running at an HVLP pressure. But I'm also going to have a very slow working speed as compared to every other technology.
Right.
So that's if you live in a zone where you have to be HVLP compliant, like California, Utah now is, a few other states, yeah, you got to have that, but you got to be aware of how to actually use that to be compliant. Tips: find a good spray gun manufacturer made by a quality manufacturer. Look for a solid feel. Look for equipment built to last. I say stay away from the Harbor Freights of the world. Top-end guns are typically better for a reason. We all know the good ones out there. You know, your Nesta Iwatas, your SADAs, your Kremlins. Graco actually doesn't have a bad one. I like that Binks trophy gun a lot in this market. But I think in this particular instance, it's whatever you as an operator feel work best for you. I certainly wouldn't, in most instances, use an HVLP gun in a production sense for the wood industry, unless I'm doing samples, small jobs where I have a quick color change, like a PPS cup type size job, something like that. Second piece of advice is find a good equipment distributor that can service you, stock parts, and can advise you. When you got a question, it's invaluable to pick up a phone and call somebody at 9 o'clock at night that can tell you what your problem is of why something's not working, you know. That's what I would say look for.
Yeah, and I want to key in on that a little bit, because that's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm finding the best of the best that's out there, is because I've just had so many frustrations with, you know, these sorts of issues. You have a problem with the equipment, you call the person you bought it from, and they're just a salesman. And so I think that is becoming a thing of the past, in my opinion, and I see things going, because there's people out here like you, DC Clark, and some of these distributors that are passionate about what they're doing, and they're delivering service on a whole nother level today. And I want to keep bringing these kind of companies and people to light on that. So I appreciate, you know, what you're doing with this, and being a leader, and sticking out here, and being able to, you know, I mean, we've had a lot of conversations. I've learned a ton of stuff that I've been confused about just this last year, and I appreciate what you're doing. So thanks for that.
All right. So the next, get up there. Next one we all know about is Airless. So Airless works with not a needle, but a ball on a seat. And when you pull the trigger, it's all on or all off. And then it goes through a tip. The tips come obviously in different thousandths of an inch. That's strictly a hydraulic force that shears that high pressure material through that orifice. You're typically seeing an operating range of 1,500 to 3,000 pounds of fluid pressure. Although if you want to spray peanut butter, we can spray peanut butter. You need 7,000 or 8,000 psi though. So there's applications where we'll do all kinds of interesting things. There's obviously no air through the Airless, and therefore no CFM consumption. It has a velocity of 8 to 10 feet per second, and you typically see an average transfer efficiency of about 50 to 60%. Very coarse rating on this as well, because there's no air to help break up that particle. You get a pretty large coarse particle with Airless, because you're relying only on hydraulic shearing through the tip at all. Of course, you have a skin injection hazard anytime you're over 1,100 psi. What's great about this, though, is if you're a contractor, you don't need a compressor. You know, you can run it straight off an electric pump. You only have a single hose going to the gun. Very, very portable. You can run big, long, 300 feet of hose on this if you needed to. Perfect for painting construction, bridges, outdoor stuff. But in a shop, I know there's a lot of guys running these, but I would certainly look to the next thing we're going to talk about, which is, air-assisted airless and air coat. It's a technology that's going to give you the same benefits and working speed as an airless, but a lot better particle breakup, a lot higher transfer efficiency, that kind of thing.
So I want to ask you a question, because you see this a lot, And I don't see this so much in my area. Mostly in my area, guys are using air-assisted airless. But I know a lot of my California buddies and stuff like air is still really popular out there. What do you think the reason is for some of these pocket areas in the country where airless is still so popular? Is it just because of maybe the background they came from?
Yeah, typically background and or weak equipment distribution in the area. Believe it or not, Southern California, for instance, hasn't had a lot of equipment distribution for whatever reason. I don't know why.
That's so interesting to me because there's a lot of finishing going on out there.
Yeah, it's starting to change now, but in the early days, there just wasn't that many. There was barely a Kremlin distributor there for many years, so kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So air-assisted airless, which I will talk about, is a little different than Kremlin Air Mix or Wagner Air Coat. So it's kind of like we're getting there. Okay, so air-assisted airless is like combining that conventional gun that Joe Binks made and the airless gun that we looked at before. If you ever take an airless and you turn the pressure way down until you see the fingers or tails in the fan pattern, that's all that we're doing. We're turning the fluid pressure down to try to lower that forward velocity of the paint particle. And then we're adding a little bit of air focused at those fingers to break up the tails and create a fan pattern that doesn't have any tails or noticeable fingers in your finish. Okay, you can see our velocity slowed. It's about 3 to 7 feet, or 4 to 6 feet per second. Our transfer efficiency is 65% with most air-assisted airlesses out there. So as you're seeing as we do this, slideshow, the slower I throw a particle, the higher my transfer efficiency goes. Your average air-assisted airless out there, you're going to give it an atomization rating of probably 4 or 5. Okay. The same issue though, if I have this heavy tail and I'm pushing the air out at that tail, I'm going to push more to the center than I am to the outside edge. So I still have that same propensity to get a heavier centered fan pattern with a typical air-assisted airless. So something to be aware of. Air Coat and Kremlin Air Mix both use a patent where instead of, if you notice in that previous slide, the air was focused more up, this is actually focused to come out right at this point. We call it the locus of atomization. We're able to use a lower fluid pressure yet, typically 300 to 600 psi is all that's needed for wood coatings. We're able to use a very low air pressure, typically on the Wagner 7 to 10, maybe 12 psi, on the Kremlins 10, 15, 20 psi. The slowest velocity that you're seeing, 2 feet per second, we're seeing transfer efficiencies of 87%, sometimes a little more on the Wagner. Kremlin advertises 86%, a high atomization rating of about 6.
So that's a pretty big difference right there. Well, I mean, I guess not huge, but so let's talk a little bit about that. So air-assisted airless is sort of the generic term, and this is something I've never have understood, and I think a lot of people are confused about, is the difference between air mix and air coat. And what they're referring to, obviously, is what you're talking about is the technology of bringing it into that locus point there.
Correct. That's something that most people don't understand. Air-assisted airless, generically speaking, they all are, meaning you're using an airless type gun with this ball and seat, and you're introducing air at the air cap, would be the generic term air-assisted airless. But these other, manufacturing companies have patents on their air caps and that technology of where and how they introduce the air to the fluid stream, and that's why you're hearing the trademark names Air Mix, which is Kremlin, Air Coat, which is Wagner, and that typically has to do with exactly where and how they're introducing the air pattern to the fluid pattern.
Now, so how long since Wagner's been more of a player in the European markets? How long has the air coat technology been there versus the Kremlin Air Mix? Are they roughly the same, or what's the story on that?
We've been competing in Europe for a very long time. Air Mix, which is Kremlin, came over to the USA in 1981. Wagner came over in the 70s. So, they've both been around for a long time, but Wagner didn't get a lot of North American penetration in the industrial wood market. Really, I wouldn't say until the last 3 to 5 years. Kremlin's had a 20-year head start on that, maybe 30-year. What else was your question on that?
So one of the things, and it's funny, when I was at AWFS, like, I went by some guys that sell like Merker pumps and, different pumps, and was talking to them. One of the things that I thought was very interesting that they all said, and they would kind of like, goes, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but if you buy this system, don't use the gun that comes with it. Get the Golden gun or the Wagner.
Right.
And that's the reason for this, and kind of what we're going to discuss. And also we're going to take a look at this next week out there, and we're going to kind of do a little shootout between the two so that we can kind of give some more information for people out there that are trying to make a decision on which gun to go and what pump to buy and all that. But I think what I've kind of learned is the pump technology is not so much different. It's more in the gun. Is that correct, or am I wrong about that?
As far as transfer efficiency and atomization, 100% all in the gun. The pump, you got to have a good, reliable, pulse-free, maintenance-free, and you want to consider how much it takes to load and flush a pump. But as long as you have a good, reliable pump, what's making your finish look right is all about the gun. Absolutely.
Good.
Okay, so talk a little bit about the Wagners, being that they don't have a lot of exposure in this market. Good quality manufacturing, it's a good solid feel, built to last. It's actually, what I've found in my testing, it's the highest transfer efficiency available. I've actually done some testing at some very large kitchen cabinet manufacturers where we weighed, like we were talking about earlier in this video, where we weighed the parts before, we sprayed them with each Kremlin and Wagner, weighed them after, and we had more material on with the Wagner with the same amount of consumption. And so we were seeing about a 7 to 30% transfer efficiency improvement based upon whatever coating. There was variables there if it was stain, clear, top coat, but in my opinion, Wagner has the highest transfer efficiency. And as you've used this gun a little bit yourself, you've seen that it has typically less air usage and yet still better atomization. So the less air and energy that we use equals savings. Slower I throw that particle, the more transfer efficiency I become.
Right. And I want to talk a little bit about the gun. There's been a couple of us, and I'm actually seeing more guys. A lot of guys are, jumping on the Wagner tree. But a couple of things that I really like about it. One, you have two air caps that you can choose from. So if you're shooting some of the high viscosity water coating, to have a cap for that. And you may be getting to this, but they also have that reversible tip that's so great for water-based, because one of the things, and I'm not putting CA technologies down at all because they're pretty much owned by Wagner. But the difference is those cat-eye tips, or whatever you want to call them. Like with water-based, they want to skim over really fast, and it depends on the coating. But one of the coatings that I shoot a lot is the CIC, and it dries really super fast. Probably one of the more faster drying water bases out there. And if you're not careful, you can be in the middle of spraying something, you start getting all kinds of wacky fan patterns because it's like basically skimmed over. And the great thing about that, the Wagner is I can just turn that thing around and blow it out instead of I got to take the thing out and I got to get one of those little bitty needles and pick at it and try to get it out and put it back in my gun and see if it's right. Wagner, I flip it around, as long as I got material coming out, I know I'm good to go. So that is, to me, a huge advantage for that gun. Yeah,
absolutely. And we'll get to that in 1 second. This little screen right here, if anybody wants to screenshot this is perfect as a good review. You're looking across the board at your particle velocity, and as you see, it gets slower as we move to the right. And you see that same thing, your transfer efficiency gets higher and higher the slower that we throw that particle. And then this gives you the ability to look at what's my atomization rating for each kind of technology, my fluid pressure, my air pressure, what's my typical CFM usage for each. So this is an important one too, is, these air mix and air coat guns use the least amount of CFM of guns that use air. So compressor wise, this is a big consideration because, if you can use a pump that uses a couple CFM and a gun that uses 2 or 3 CFM, you can get away with about a 6.5, 7 CFM compressor. Whereas that's portable and still job site, if you got to get out there, usable. This kind of technology, compressor wise, you're looking at a big, you normally get 3.5 CFM per horsepower. So you're looking at 5, 6, 7 horsepower compressor for that kind of gun, and that's 220 volt, minimum motor. So,
right.
Something cool about this gun, as we're on the subject of it, like you were talking about, you got the 2 air caps. You can see here the blue air cap, which is for high viscosity. The previous photo had the red air cap, which is for low viscosity. I like that it has swivels on both the air and the fluid, so that's different. This filter actually is tool-free to break down the gun. You can just use your hands hand tight, open that up, and get to the filter. So tool-free removal of that. And then you talked about the reversible tip, which will show a little bit on that. The other thing that I love about this gun is there's no wear parts underneath the cap. This is actually like a hardened plastic type material. So there's no O-rings or tip seals that you're constantly replacing. I know I've sold thousands of Kremlins in my life, but my pet peeve has always been the tip seals. People lose them. They break the nozzle O-ring, and then you get a distorted fan pattern, something you have to constantly maintain, and those little parts are expensive. This is a great idea because there's nothing to wear. And then this is where that tip sits, so there's no tip seal, no white gasket that goes in the center of the tip that you're probably used to. This tip just right there. You did break one of these, though. I heard you had your cap off and you dropped your gun, and you figured out that those are breakable, but they're not wearable. So. Yeah,
don't drop it on the concrete. Doesn't work very well.
The other thing that's nice is their tips. Their standard tips are about $81, so very reasonably priced. They're not over $100, like some of them out there. You can see here's that red air cap for the low viscosity that we were talking about as well. This is the gun in action. Should spray.
Or not. There we go.
Lag. This was actually made by Scott at Wood Craftsman. It's always fun to me, like when a customer is so happy with his gun, he starts making Instagram videos and posting them and sending them to me. And I said, "Hey, send me that. I'm gonna put this one up." But I love looking at this and look at that glassy, smooth finish and very, very little overspray.
Yeah, and so I've talked to Scott about this gun, and kind of like his comparison. He said it's like shooting with a spray can. Almost, it's so fine. It just missed it out.
Yeah. Now you had a good results with the blue air cap and the Malaysia water base with that thicker viscosity. I'm curious to hear your comments.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've been doing, of course, everybody knows, is talking more about working with these high viscosity water coatings, and I honestly have struggled over the past year with that because there's just really been no information, even really from the sources on that. So me and Matt Sutter and a few other guys on Instagram, we've all been going, what's the deal with this stuff? What can we do with this? Now, I'm not sure where this information came from, but a lot of manufacturers talk about these double orifice tips, and they talk about them as, they call them bubble busters. But what I have found is something entirely different. Actually, on some coatings, if you have those in, it will cause bubbles. So what ended up happening was we started playing around. I started playing around with double orifice tips, and I talked with some of the guys from Lacey, and they said that what it does, or actually, I'm sorry, let me go back and say that again. Actually, I was talking to you about it, and we're talking about these coatings being thixotropic, and how basically what happens is they have, it hits that little small eye, and it's like a ketchup bottle. So, you're trying to get the ketchup out and sling it out and it won't come. Well, you bump it and then it thins it and then it goes out and then it turns back into a material again. So Matt Slater and I started playing with that, and what we found is that you can reduce your air pressure, because one of the problems that we run into in the cabinet industry with water base is overspray. So when you're inside of the cabinet, most of your solvent-based materials, you're going to be shooting at like 10 to 15 psi's. Well, this Lacey stuff is so thick that we're having to shoot it at like 20 to 25. It just depends on, all that sort of stuff. So we kept trying to figure out a way to.
That's a big problem, because that cloud of overspray bounces back out and lands everywhere, right?
Exactly. Yes. So what we found is going with that Wagner gun versus the CA gun, and I don't have the Kremlin. The impact is basically what that's sort of based after, is that I can end up reducing my air pressure, depending on the coating, up to 5 or 6 psi. That's a huge advantage if you're spraying inside of boxes, or like I do, and a lot of guys, just reducing the amount of overspray, because as you talked about earlier, the higher the velocity, the more the overspray, the more paint you're losing. So that's been the answer, is this Wagner gun with the high solids cap and double orifice tips.
Yeah, it's been a great combination, and everyone that I've sold of these, I get usually a compliment the day or two after they get it, and they go, "Wow, this is game changer. I've never had anything spray it and lay it out like this before. I don't have orange peel problems, or I don't have dry spray problems." It's been really rewarding in that respect.
Yeah, and I mean, we're getting these high viscosity water-based materials to look like a solvent, conversion varnish off the gun, which is really interesting, because my opinion has been is like, you could not do that with water-based. It was still going to look orange peel, and it was going to kind of flow out. Some coatings have a little bit more orange peel, but like the Renner stuff, even the Lacey, if you thin it a little bit, I mean, it's going to come off and look like a solvent, base finish. And that's just, amazing to me, because I haven't seen that, in the last 6 years I've been shooting water base. I just got used to it's going to look orange peely and flow out, but not with this gun. I've got some pictures on my Instagram, or you can go over and look at Matt Slater's page, and that's what he's using, is the Wagner Air Coat.
I was just going to say, every time I look at Slater paint on Instagram and look at finishes, it is laid out flat, and I want to be like, Matt, say Wagner Air Coat, but they look.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I do have some other guns to compare them to as well. So that, what I'm telling you is true. And also, look at that and show the guys the difference too when I'm down there. So that'll be good for people to actually see it. I haven't done any videos on it, because I've actually been waiting on this trip to LA. So I've been holding out.
So one thing, I've been watching your videos, and one thing that's been my pet peeve I want to bring up, and we're going to talk about pumps. I always hear guys say, "What size pump do you need?" And they say, "Oh, you need 30 to 1 or 15 to 1 or whatever." You should not look at pumps really in that way. All that means, when you say the ratio of the pump, is if I put X amount of air pressure in, let's use 100 pounds of pressure of air in, I'll get times that amount, that 30 to 1 out. So 3,000 pounds fluid pressure out. To 15 to 1, 1,500 pounds of pressure out. If it's 10 to 1, 1,000 pounds of air pressure out, right? Or fluid pressure out. What you really got to be looking at is the piston or cylinder size, the displacement of fluid volume. So let's just say, you're looking at an 1840 pump. That would be 18 to 1. Always the first digit in the pump is the ratio. The second digit is the fluid displacement per cycle. So one piston stroke up, one piston stroke down, you're going to get 40 cc's out. Other pumps that you hear out there, like the 15C25, that's 15 to 1, 25 cc's of a cycle. So the bigger that fluid piston is, the less shear and less stress on the paint you're going to put. So when you're talking always about the water base and the bubbling, when someone says, oh, you need a 30 to 1, that's somewhat irrelevant. That's just saying I have the ability to spray up to 3,000 psi of pressure with 100 pounds of air, right? What you really want to be talking about is what's the pump volume and size that, to the product that you're trying to spray. So I was listening to one lately where someone said, oh, yeah, you got to have a 30 to 1 pump for water base. Well, what pressure do you spray at? 600 psi. Well, why do you need a 30 to 1 pump? What you're really wanting with those waters is probably a 25 cc or larger piston or fluid section on the pump, so that you're not experiencing the shear that you're seeing on the smaller, like 14 cc type fluid sections.
Gotcha.
So hopefully that clears up a little bit for you guys.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because something I've not been able to get out of anyone in this industry to tell me what the difference is between a 14 to 1, a 30 to 1. They just automatically, what you're saying, they go, oh, well, you need a 30 to 1 because it's bigger. Okay. Right. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's an excellent point, and I will make sure that I talk about that more often in the videos that are coming up and when we talk about this stuff. So what I hear you saying with that is that with the water-based materials that we're dealing with, and some that may be more shear sensitive, if you have a bigger piston, it's going to agitate the coating less and equate to less bubbles.
Correct. You're not trying to suck that volume of material through very small, tiny passages, because the piston itself is bigger, the ball inside of it's bigger, all of that. So you get less stress on the coating with the larger the fluid section on the pump.
Gotcha. So one other question I have on that is, how much does the role of, say, getting a bigger suction tube play into that, or bigger fluid lines? Does that help at all, or is that just you're getting more volume to the gun at that point?
You're getting more volume to the gun, but there again, you're probably only putting out 9, 10, 11 ounces out of the gun with most of the tip sizes that you're talking about, maybe even less. So you're not ever exceeding the volume capacity of a typical small diameter hose or something like that for the pump.
Okay.
I would go with a 25 cc or larger fluid section. Usually the larger, the less stress. So, we've talked lately about the 1840 Wagner Wildcat pump. 40 cc section has even less stress than a 25 cc section. So
Great.
Spread that out, bigger pump, needs less stress for the water-based coatings as you go through. Or if you can afford it, look at those high-pressure diaphragm pumps that we've been talking about. They're just expensive for a lot of these small shops, to consider.
Yeah, the Cobra, that thing, so nice.
Yeah.
And earlier, that's what they were they using the diaphragm pumps in that video that you were talking about when you were in Italy, or were they using the bigger Wagner pumps?
Those were all 1840 all 1840 Wildcat pumps that you saw in this.
Okay.
Yep. That's very, very common. It's got the icebreaker motor, so it'll never ice up or freeze, even in constant use.
So talk about that for a second, because I've had a couple guys that have talked to you, and they're like, I don't understand what that means. Can you Can you explain that a little bit in a different way, maybe?
Sure. So when you release compressed air, things get cold, right? So you ever see like a pump condensating from it stroking all day long, or a little bit of even ice crystals forming around the air motor of a pump when they've been running all day? That's because as you release the air, it's refrigerating, basically all day long. The icebreaker design will never let ice build up to a point where it would stop the air motor. It can basically run 24/7 and never have an ice, stoppage for that. Most pumps out there have that issue. Is if you were running them, day in, day out, eventually you get a little bit of a cold environment and it'll actually freeze and stop a pump. So that's what I'm talking about with the icebreaker technology.
Got it. And there's some guys too. I don't know what the number of it is, but a lot of the mobile guys are liking those. The one with the hopper on top. What's that one?
Yeah, so they actually have. That's the Evo Motion Series pump from Wagner. That's a 40-to-1, 15 cc. So it's very small and portable, able to have a lot of pressure if you need for pretty much any application. But that's an inverted piston pump, and that's something kind of unique. A guy here in San Diego just got one from me that does a lot of mobile on-site kitchens. He raves about it. He loves that thing. I've never seen a guy with as big a smile as when I watched him paint with that. What's cool about the inverted is you're feeding the hopper right into the piston. It's upside down from a normal pump, and very minimal clean out. There's no throat seal in that pump whatsoever to be filling up. His request was, I want the lightest, most portable pump I can have that can still spray air coat. And that's what that request was there. And that's actually not a bad price on a pump either. It's in the, $2,800 range for a setup with gun and hose and all of that.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of guys too, the reason they like those is they're shooting the water-based 2K, and they can kind of mix up a smaller batch. And I have one gallon that is using a Titan, one of those 65s, and he likes it because at the end, if he's getting close, he can just dump some water in the top of it and push the rest of it out. Which you could actually do that thing with an air assist. I've done that before, so
that's a consideration.
Yeah.
You don't want to get a pump that's so big that it takes so much to fill it up if you're using two component materials that you can't reuse, or you don't want to have such a big diameter hose that you're wasting paint to load it as well. So that's something to definitely consider for your applications.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's the end of the slideshow and the presentations. I appreciate you having me. This is all of my contact information. There's all of the videos that you've seen here are available on my website. I have about 90 videos on YouTube. You can subscribe. I'd love to get some subscribers on YouTube, and you know me through Instagram. So that's everything you need to get a hold of me right there.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and do this. This was fantastic.
Absolutely. I'm happy to help anybody that needs and be here as a resource. Not just trying to sell equipment, but I like helping people. So feel free to contact me for any questions or comments or anything like that. I'm here to help.
Yeah. And we need to, are you on Facebook as well?
I am. It's Total Finishing Solutions at Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, we need to get you in the kitchen cabinet painting experts group, and then in the professional kitchen cabinets group. I'll make sure that I invite you in those, and I'll let Brian and Corey both know, because there's all the time, people are always looking for in both of those spray booths or, equipment. So we need to get you hooked up in those as well, so you can be a resource in there.
Okay. Sounds good. I appreciate it.
Yeah.